My name is Dennis Cooley. I am the director of the Northern Plains Ethics Institute. The mission of the NPEI, which has been at NDSU since 2000, is to promote democratic participation in ethical and social issues affecting the Northern Plains and beyond. We were asked to put together this event, which Chris Wilson has been doing for a number of years, by Anastasia Andrianova, who is the president of the Faculty Senate. Now I'm going to turn this over to her so she can do the introduction of our speaker. But before I do give that to her fully, this event is being recorded. It will be edited and put on the Northern Plains Ethics Institute YouTube channel. So, and if you would like to ask a question, please put it in chat and it'll be read to Mr. Wilson and he will answer it that way. And it's not Professor Andrianova.
Thank you, Dr. Cooley. Thanks, Dennis. And thank you to Chris Wilson for agreeing to provide this. I'd like to begin by introducing our speaker. So Chris Wilson has been NDSU's Chief of Staff since 2015. Prior to that, he served as NDSU's General Counsel from 2012 through 2015. He was also the General Counsel to NDSCS from 2013 to 2015. Before coming to NDSU, Wilson was the Associate General Counsel of Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, from 2004 to 2012. Prior to that, Chris was a corporate attorney with Bond, Schoeneck and King, PLLC, a law firm nationally known for its representation of higher education institutions. Wilson received his law degree from Cornell Law School and his undergraduate degree from Duke University, and he's currently working towards his PhD in education at NDSU. On a personal note, his wife is an elementary school teacher in the Fargo public school system, and he has 3 children also in the school system. Go Spartans. Thank you, Chris. And I'll give it over to you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm glad everybody could join us. It seems like we've got a really good crowd here. Just commenting, not only is my wife a teacher, I come from a long line of teachers, great-grandmother, grandmother, mother, sister, niece, wife. And my father was president of the school board. And I was actually literally born into a dispute between my mother didn't get paid maternity leave when I was born, and the teacher right after her did. And so this is back in New York, she almost sued the law school, or sued the school district. So I was literally born into a dispute between faculty and administration. I was destined for this job from a very early age, since faculty administration issues were literally part of my birth. So that's how I ended up here in higher ed. Glad everybody joined us. I understand, Anastasia, that maybe there's some UND folks were going to be invited. This is the first time I've done this presentation for anybody outside of NDSU. So welcome to all the people, or people here from UND. Pretty excited about that. I will say this: I don't know UND's policies as well. During the course of this, I'll talk about system policies. I'll talk about NDSU policies. I suspect that they are largely aligned, but I just can't speak specifically for UND, and I would encourage anybody from UND to, if they have follow-up questions, to bring it to their folks at UND. They have a chief of staff. They have Peter Johnson there, who handles legislative stuff, and they have a few attorneys too there from the Attorney General's office. I'm sure any one of them would be willing to answer your questions for you. So let's just jump in. I am going to, for anybody who's done this with me before, I previously just talked my way through this. This is the first time doing it on Zoom, and this is also the first time I'm going to try and use a PowerPoint presentation. So anybody who wants to have the PowerPoint afterwards, because there's going to be some links and different places that I will be referencing, and all those links will be available on the PowerPoint presentation. So that will be, as I point out later in the presentation, We have a website, UND has a website dealing with legislative matters. This presentation, we're going to try and also link over to, I know it's being recorded, we're going to try and link that there. But at least the PowerPoint presentation will also be available on that website. So if you have any questions later on about a website or where to get to something, just go to that website and this thing should be up and on there pretty quick and you'll be able to find it. So now, those of you who know me, I'm not very technologically savvy, so I'm going to try and do this and hope it goes right. So here we go. Are you seeing that right now? No? Okay. How about that? Okay, excellent.
Yep, looks good.
So let's get to the next slide. Okay. What I'm going to cover today is kind of 4 different topics. The first one being, and I'll just quickly go over what we're talking about. So if you have questions or relate to something, you might want to hold your questions till the end of the time. Also, by the way, we have an hour and a half slated for this. My presentation previously has gone on 45 minutes to an hour. So we have plenty of time for questions. And if people have questions, please put them into the chat. Be happy to answer them as we go through them. So we have plenty of time. I am going to try and keep it to an hour though, for people's schedules. If they want to get out for an hour, that's what I'm going to try and go for. The 4 topics that I'm going to cover are this first one means Political Purposes and Corrupt Practices Act. Really what I'm getting at there is the distinction between elections and what we're talking now, which is legislative behavior. There's a difference between what you can do at each one of those. And I'm just going to cover that real briefly. If this presentation were to be before elections, I would cover section 1 more, but this is really more about legislative behavior, not election behavior. And there's a distinction there. So we'll go over that. The next section is just going to be about how the legislature works. There's always a lot of confusion, especially people who are new to the state or new to this area, just how this process works with the legislature and how the bills, it's kind of crazy here, with only being every 2 years. And I'll just quickly run through when people talk, they throw on these terms, maybe you'll be able to help understand some of those terms. The next one is drawing a distinction between what the university communicates to the legislature and how we come about creating our legislative initiatives, our priorities, versus an employee's communication. The university is very formal in their model. Employees have certain freedoms that the institution does not, but it also comes with some restrictions. So those are the 4 basic areas we're going to be talking about today. So Political Purposes and Corrupt Practices Act. So the reason why I use the word political purposes in quotes, that's a defined term in the Corrupt Practices Act. We think of political purposes, we use that kind of euphemistically for all types of political activity, both formal political activity, internal political activity. There's all sorts of, the word political is thrown around in kind of a loose way. I'm talking about it in a very specific way here. The Corrupt Practices Act is a set of laws in North Dakota that prohibits the use of state resources for political purposes. So what does political purposes mean? Largely, it means the election of candidates or ballot initiatives. So there's a set of rules that exist. So in the spring election, the fall election, there's a set of rules that say that you can't use state resources for to elect a candidate, to oppose a candidate, or to elect or oppose a ballot initiative. Why I want to touch on this one is I want to draw a distinction later between what this statute says for elections and what we will be dealing with, which is legislative behavior, because this prohibits election stuff. And it's a very serious statute. The things that we'll be talking about the legislature are largely policy driven, which means it's NDSU yeah, it could impact your employment status. This could impact your freedom because this is actually a criminal statute. So if if it comes, and we're not going to cover these topics in detail, simply because this is the wrong time of year to do it. But what I want you to deal with or to walk away with is, if you are talking about helping a candidate or working on a ballot initiative, you need to be very seriously considering how you separate yourself from NDSU or UND when you're doing that. Because anything from like using the copiers, your email, using your email account, using your time, those things like your paid time, those all constitute university assets, and you could actually end up triggering this statute. And if you think, well, I'm just going to try and do it because it's not that big a deal and they'll never find out. If somebody does find out, I mean, let's take away the fact that it's a criminal statute and you may be jeopardizing yourself with some criminal statute. You're also not going to help your candidate, because these issues do get brought up frequently in the media, that somebody's trying to use state resources to help somebody else out. And instead of helping your candidate or your initiative, you end up becoming a liability for that candidate, because the opposition is using your actions against them. So just be careful on that front. But on these topics, by law, the university is always neutral. So when it comes to candidates and when it comes to ballot initiatives, the university is prohibited from taking a position. Employees are not. They need to proceed with caution, as I talked about. So even if there is something that directly impacts the university and its operations, we can't take a position on it. We can, under the statute, provide information, factual information about the impact. We can't take a position on it. Employees can, but you have to be careful on that one. So like I said, we're going to skip over that one. I've done this presentation at other times before election years, and we spend a lot of time talking about, what is an asset and things along those lines. We're just going to gloss over that one right now. And if somebody wants to know about that, they can always come and talk to me afterwards. We're going to start talking about the legislature. So, going back to Civics 101, there are three parts to the government. There's the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary branch. We're concentrating right now on the legislative branch because this is North Dakota, and the legislature meets once every 2 years for 80 days. So that's and there's a lot of activity during those 80 days. And that's really what we want to kind of be able to talk about here today, is how do we do that? How do we interact with the legislature during that 80 days as both an institution and an individual, and do it okay? So there's two houses, two chambers of the legislature. There's the Senate and the House of Representatives. Unlike the federal government, we're all familiar. The senators are elected to 6-year terms, and the House of Representatives are elected to 2-year terms. The terms are all the same in North Dakota. Everybody's elected to a 4-year term. The sessions occur once every biennium. On odd number years, there's a biennium, and it lasts 80 days. It starts the beginning of January every year, depending on how the calendar falls. This year it started on January 3rd, and then they will run for 80 days. They don't count weekends and stuff when they're not in session. So it almost always ends the end of April during that time period. Sometimes if they know, they almost always use the full 80 days. If there is something that they know they have to be involved with that's going to happen off cycle, they will try and save a few days to handle that stuff. So that, for example, this last year, they knew they had to do redistricting, and that was they didn't have the information to fall during the session. So I think they saved like 5 days or something like that. And then last summer they met and handled all the redistricting efforts during that time period. If they don't finish up in 80 days, then the governor has to call a special session, and you have to go through a lot more hoops to add more days in. So they always try and finish within their 80 days, usually with the full 80 days. So there are 47 legislative districts in North Dakota. Under the Constitution, they're supposed to be equally distributed with citizens among all 47. Whether that happens or not is an open question, but it is they are constitutionally mandated to do it. But like everything else in politics, the beauty's in the eye of the beholder. If you're curious about the legislature, the first place to start really is there's a website, and they do have a wealth of information on the North Dakota legislature. You can find out tons of stuff on that. I'm going to see if I can do this and bring this up. And if I bring this screen over here, can you all see that now?
Yep.
Okay. So that's a map of North Dakota and all the districts associated with it. You'll see over here, this is Fargo. We'll have to just kind of zoom in, and because Fargo is, being the largest city, has the largest number of districts. So this is all the districts that are located in the city of Fargo. I'm imagining, I know Grand Forks, you will have a few districts up there too, probably not as many, 18, 42, and 43. For those of us that are at NDSU, I imagine most of you live within one of those districts. If you scroll down on that website and find your district, you can click on it. The two districts that really impact NDSU. So if you see that big blue district right there, that's District 45. That is the district that actually NDSU's main campus is in, District 45. Across the street, literally, is District 44. And so District 45, where NDSU is located, NDSU, like all districts, we have one senator and two representatives. Our senator is Senator Ron Sorbog, and these are the two representatives representing the NDSU district. Across the street is District 44, and Senator Merrill Pepcorn, Josh Boshi, and Carla Rose Hansen are the representatives representing that district. So, like, NDSU is in 45, but many of our students are located in 44 because they find themselves in student housing that's across the street. So you can find your district up there. If you put an address in, it'll tell you what district you're in. We are in, I'm gonna shut that down now. Anybody is there any questions or anything, Tyler, at this point on any of that?
None that I see in the chat. If anyone has a question, feel free to post it there.
Okay. We are now in the 68th Legislative Assembly. That will run from 23 to 24. That's referred to as a biennium. It also corresponds to our budget biennium. So we will, this is the regular session. If we were in a special session, it would be the 68th Legislative Assembly special session. But the one that runs from January to April is referred to as the regular session. As you talk about, here is the website for this specific session. And in this session, you can find all the bills, all the representatives, everything you want, the committee, the conference schedules, everything that you want as far as knowing about this session is right there. So if we do like, for example, bills and resolutions, we go there. If you're interested in finding out, HB 103 is a particularly big one for us, both NDSU and UND. That is a bill for appropriations for higher education. So HB 103 is our budget bill this year. And, so you pull that bill up, you can go there, you go to the versions, you click on there, and that's all the information about the budget for the system that's currently being considered right now. You can go there, the actions, all the different actions that have been taken. You can watch all the videos of all the testimonies that have been given, if including President Cook and President Armacost testimony is there, hearings that are coming up, and then there should be more testimony. So so that is all right there. You can find out a wealth of information about what's going on right there. And it's really important for us to pay attention to, because hearings, but they only give hearing schedules for 1 week out in advance. So there's a lot of bills out there right now that don't have hearings yet, and you just kind of watch them to see what, if you're interested in following a hearing or following a particular bill, you just kind of got to watch the calendar and wait for the hearings to drop, which they do 1 week in advance. Bills start every year in either the House or the Senate, depending on who is the sponsor of the bill. For our budget bill, it goes back and forth every biennium. So last biennium, our budget bill started in the Senate, and it was SB 2003. This year, because it's the next biennium, our budget starts in the House, and it's HB 1003. And there are differences in the chambers as far as how they handle higher education. So it all comes out in the same, but it just depends on, like, the House versus the Senate, how things go, whether you're in the Senate first or the Senate second. So pick your poison. Either way you want to go, it all comes out the same in the end. So, and here's an interesting thing that I want to talk about, because we're at that time of the session where you see a lot of funny bills that get introduced in the North Dakota legislature. And it's because North Dakota is different than a lot of states and and the federal government, in that in North Dakota, democracy runs really deep, in all honesty, in North Dakota. Every bill, every legislator in the state can put a bill in, and that bill will get a committee, will be assigned to a committee, and it'll get a hearing and a vote. So that's good in that it's very democratic. There's, in like the federal government, bills are, curated, if you want to call it that, as far as leadership gets to determine which bills move forward, which bills don't. Every bill in North Dakota gets a vote. And so that's good. On the downside is sometimes you get some bills that are, a little different, and maybe don't have much of a chance of success, but they will still get a committee hearing and a vote. And the committee is really where the work is done at the legislature, because once a bill is introduced, it gets assigned to a committee, and that's where your ability to participate as a citizen really comes into the sharpest focus, because you can testify. Oh, did I skip that page? I'm sorry, I was going through that one and I forgot to skip to that slide. It's going right over. So testimony, so a bill will be assigned to a committee. There's a bunch of committees, and you can find all those committees out on the website. Then there will be a date set aside for public testimony, and there will be a time and a hearing date. You go and you can testify, and it's open to the public. Anybody who wants to testify can go testify. and you can go in there and express your support. Yeah, I support, I oppose, I'm neutral. But you want to make them aware of things that, you don't really have a strong interest in it, but you want to make them aware of how it might impact them. You just go in there and you can tell them that. And so that is the single probably most interactive thing you could do, would be to testify at a committee hearing. You could also, as we'll talk about later, you can also just write to your legislator. The problem with that is that your legislator might not be on the committee that is reviewing the bill. So you might want to, do belt and suspenders the topic by reaching out to your legislator as well as going to testify on something, because the committee hearing, so the committee will take all the testimony. They will then have a vote to recommend to the full House or the full Senate whether or not a bill should be passed or not. And the full Senate and the full House take those committee recommendations very seriously. So that's really where, if you want to have a conversation, have your voice heard, that's a really good place to do it. So it goes from committee, goes to the full chamber. Bills that pass the full chamber go on to the other chamber after an event called crossover. Halfway through the legislative session, there'll be a date called crossover, and all the bills that passed each chamber are then submitted to the other chamber for the entire process to start over, rinse and repeat. Bills that did not pass both chambers just don't go, they're dead. So everything comes out of committee with a recommendation, a do pass or do not pass recommendation. But once they fail in a chamber, they're dead unless kind of resurrected somehow by, there's some games that get played, but by and large, they're dead. But once surviving bills go to the other chamber, they're also assigned to a committee, and the whole process starts over again. There will be another date for testimony in the opposite chamber, another opportunity to be heard. You have to follow you have to go to the website, find out what the day and time is for the hearing, and then make your voice heard again. Assuming that it comes out of committee okay and passes the chamber again. If it fails in the chamber, it's once again dead. If it passes the chamber, of course, it goes to the governor's office for the governor to sign, which he can either sign or veto or play some games with. So he's got line item veto authority in the state, which gives him certain authority to line out certain aspects of bills, but not entirely. So that's essentially how a bill becomes a law, which when I was putting this presentation together yesterday, totally made me think of Schoolhouse Rock, I'm Just a Bill. So those of us who are of a certain age who remember that cartoon, I just wanted to provide a link to that, because I did watch that yesterday when I was preparing the slide, and I just kind of remembered how awesome it was. So I put that link in there for anybody who wants to watch it. Okay, so switching from that to kind of like how the legislature works, how does NDSU and UND, I'm assuming, come up with how they do this? Like, what is going to be their communication with the legislature? Well, once again, as I mentioned early on, we are neutral when it comes time for election. We never take a candidate position, and we never take a ballot initiative position. But once the legislature is seated and they come into they take office in December after the elections, then it is fully legal and appropriate for NDSU and other state agencies to make their interests known to the legislature, because the legislature, a lot of the activities that the state government participates in isn't handled by the legislature, it's handled by state agencies who are effectuating the will of the state, and the legislature needs to know how we're doing, what the issues are confronting all the various state agencies. And so that piece becomes important for the legislature to understand how whether it's the Department of Transportation or higher ed, what are we seeing? What do we need? How do we each serve our mission that the state wants us to serve? And so we start our process, along time, well before the legislative session starts. And really, the lion's share of what we deal with, nearly all of what we deal with at the university, is really budget making. Like, where's our budget? How does our budget look? And then that's where the bulk of our efforts go when it comes to legislative effort, is in creating the budget and working with the legislature on the higher ed budget. There may occasionally be a policy bill, but mostly it's appropriations bills that we are working on before the legislative effort starts. And so let me step back a little bit. There's two types of bills. There's appropriations bills. Those are bills that deal with money. Where is the legislature going to provide money to fund? Those are appropriations bills. And then there's policy bills that are laws that are dealing with, as the name says, policy. Everything from criminal statutes to, any other type of law that's in the North Dakota Century Code. Those are policy bills. Most of what we spend our time dealing with is appropriations bills, so that we can keep the doors open and the school and the students being educated. So we regularly do take positions on legislative bills, and that is perfectly permissible under North Dakota law. Our position at NDSU and UND is oftentimes set by the State Board of Higher Education and the North Dakota University system. As the controlling entities for each of the institutions, we are beholden to our governance. And so when the state board says this is the higher ed's policy on this, we follow that. When the system office says something along those lines, we do the same thing. So it is honestly, it's a very collaborative. We work together because there's, with only 80 days, there's a rush of bills that happen, and everybody's trying to, drink from the proverbial fire hose to understand the rush of bills that are happening. And there's policy reviews, there's legal reviews, there's budget reviews. It's a kind of a very overwhelming process that all happens during that 80 days. But you do the best you can and work your way through it. Both NDSU and UND have websites where we put out what our priorities are from a legislative perspective. So I'm just going to click on that one. This is NDSU's legislative page. On this page, you'll be able to find kind of the President Cook's 5 focus areas. You'll be able to see kind of a Cliff Notes version of our budget priorities. That's just the short page. It's a 1-pager that talks about what our budget priorities are for NDSU. There is the engineering project, a little document there that you can read about the engineering project. The bill tracking list is something provided by the system office, and these are all the bills right now that are being followed by the university system. And you can find, and these all have links to the bills. So, starting off with 1003, as we talked about, that's the appropriation bill. But there are all sorts of bills that are being followed that may impact our operations, may impact UND's operations, may not impact our operations, but may only impact the 2-year schools, for example, or may only impact one school in particular. The system office tracks all of them, and you can find that there. And I'm looking here, and we should have our big budget book on here, but I'm not seeing it here. And I will add the budget book, or I won't, but I'll make sure that the budget book is added to this thing where the budget priorities is a Cliff Notes version of it. The budget book that we produce for the legislature is the a much more expansive, exhaustive document on our budget, where we stand, and what our needs are. So, and then these are all the hearings, the committee hearings involving NDSU will be put on here, and you can follow the archived ones down there. But so this today or this week, these are the ones that and it's mostly ag that's testifying today, and are testifying yesterday. It actually rolled over to today, but you can watch those right there. They're all live. And if I close that out, UND has a similar situation. This is their page, and similar type information can be found there. So, and I'm not their chief of staff, so I'm afraid I just don't know as much about what their legislative initiatives are. I can't speak to it as much, but it is all right there for those of you from UND that want to find out that information. It's all right there. Let's see here. So let's move over to employees' communication with the legislature. Now, this is really what the kind of the gist of the presentation is, but it's relatively straightforward. You know, it's, as a public employee, you do not leave your rights at the schoolhouse gates. You are still a public, you're still a citizen. You still enjoy freedom of speech and your right to participate as a citizen in the workings of the government. That concept is found in both state board policy and NDSU policy. And I'm sure there's a UND policy about it. I didn't have it. But if we look at ND-US policy, you will find in there all this information about the fact that you can participate as a citizen in all sorts of political activity. And the same thing goes for NDSU policy 160, which I am more familiar with. And one of the really nice things about NDSU policy 160, and for those of you at NDSU, you'll appreciate this, it's actually well written. And some of our policies I have found leave a little certain something to be desired as far as clarity. This one is, it's clear on a lot of things, and it's just well written. I mean, as kind of a connoisseur of this stuff, I actually appreciate when it's really well written. And so, you know, when you read it, it's interesting because it talks about some important stuff. The fact that, like, the university is very reluctant to take positions on political topics. And when, you know, we oftentimes get questioned about that, like, why aren't you guys speaking out more on this issue? Policy itself directs us not to, and you'll find that there. Some of these paragraphs probably could have been combined, but I would read that. The board does not believe it legitimate or wise for a college or university to make political commitments. Further, institutional participation in political activity, however worthy the activity might be itself, would raise legal questions. The fundamental issue is the corporate involvement of an institution, and any action that might involve institutional political unanimity, which would not represent the views of all members of the academic community. There is a danger that an institution could evolve towards a kind of political orthodoxy, which in certain circumstances might even inhibit and discourage the expression of other opinions. I mean, that's capturing, in essence, the concept that as administration, we have to speak for everybody. And that makes, that we're very cognizant of that, and we're cautious about making sure that we are not saying stuff in a way that could close down speech or could inhibit viewpoints on our campus. So that information is all right there. The stuff that deals with employees really, it can be found throughout this. But this is the one that I want to really highlight, is right here, and I'm probably making it harder to read by doing that blue, but whether participating in a political campaign or serving in a public office, and really that means for anything that you're doing that's political, all university employees must make it clear that their political positions and the views they express are their own and not necessarily those of the university. Employees in upper level administrative postings must be especially careful to avoid making any partisan political commitment on behalf of the university or the Board of Higher Education. And that's the single most important thing we can, if you take away anything from this presentation, take away that if you're engaging in speech that is, external politically oriented speech, and you're identifying yourself as associated with North Dakota State University, you also have to make sure that you are indicating that you are not speaking for North Dakota State University. Now, if and I use this example a lot, if you're not identifying you're with NDSU, if there's a bill that's in front of the legislature dealing with stamp collecting, and you just happen to be a stamp collector, and it's completely unrelated to your NDSU activities, and you want to go up there and testify, and you don't say, I am so-and-so, the associate so-and-so at NDSU. If you just say, my name is, John Smith, and I'm worried about this bill, you don't even have to worry about this. It's only if you're identifying yourself as associated with NDSU, and I'm assuming UND, that you would then have to turn around and clarify that you're not speaking on behalf of the university. We go through a lot of effort at the university to try and figure out who can speak on behalf of the university in these things. By and large, it's only the president. Sometimes it will be somebody else. Like, for example, today, Stacy Duffield is from NDSU is testifying on behalf of the governor's school budget. So we actually have a joint initiative with UND to recreate governor's school using both. So there's both representatives from UND and NDSU testifying. But that is, she was directed by NDSU to go testify, so she can speak on behalf of NDSU. Nobody else can. So anybody else who wants to go up and testify, happy to have their voice. They just can't speak on behalf of the institution. So that's the thing that's probably going to get you out of jail more frequently than anything else. And I've actually had people call me up and say, hey, these faculty members have said this thing. They wrote this letter, and this is a problem. But the letter said, we're not, we're faculty at NDSU. We're not the administration. We're not speaking on behalf of NDSU. As far as I was concerned, that was, that was it. So that's a very powerful thing. If you're writing a letter to the editor, same rule applies. And make sure that somewhere within the context of that letter, there's an indication that you are not speaking on behalf of the university. It's quite possible that the editors at the newspaper might snip that part out, but that's not on you. As long as the letter said it, and they somehow, if during the process of making it briefer, they cut that part out, well, that we just have to live with that. But that's as long as you're saying it in your letter, that's all you have to worry about. Let's see here. Just some ideas, and these are the same ideas that we talked about up front, because it's just a good idea to separate yourself politically from the institution as much as possible. If you're going to be engaging in political activities, just don't, whether it's for an election or whether it's for the legislature, if you're engaging in stuff that's political, that's not really related to the institution, keep your work self and keep your personal self separate. You know, don't use NDSU assets, the copiers, or I could go old school and say the ditto machines or anything like that. But like, matter of fact, if you actually look at the Corrupt Practices Act, it does talk about like ditto machines and things along those lines, which is just kind of awesome. But you know, the don't use your personal email, or don't use your work email account for personal emails. We've reached a point where we just need to really make sure people are separating those things. Don't it just complicates things from a public records perspective. You know, you could just raise all sorts of questions. So it's just better to be clean. Use things just separate yourselves. And of course, your work time is an asset too. So if you're going to testify and you're driving all the way to Bismarck to testify on something, you know, and it's of a personal nature, make sure that your time reflects that. If you are somebody that keeps track of your time and has to report in your time, make sure that that you're on vacation or on leave for those issues. Now, the last question I would say is what constitutes personal, and that gets a little bit more like, you don't have to do that if, for example, you're speaking on behalf of faculty senate. That is still your work-related time, I guess, for legislative behaviors, but it gets a little dicey during those things. So I just want to make sure. But no matter what, if you are talking about election or ballot initiative, I don't care whether you're representing anybody at the university, you're not allowed to use any material. It gets a little grayer during the legislative session because sometimes they want to hear directly from students, for example. Christian, the student body leader, just testified last week at the NDSU's budget hearing. And, you know, he was clearly there in not his individual capacity, but is there as his capacity as student body president. So some of these things are gray. And if you have questions about it.
Chris, could I break in?
Sure.
You've got two questions, I think, that are totally on point to what you're saying here.
Okay.
However, what are the policies when providing testimony in your professional capacity? For example, providing a summary of your research. And the other one is, or expert testimony on an issue your work has insight into.
Once again, I would think that would be exactly the same. Like if you are testifying, like if somebody's asking you to testify as an expert witness, and you're being compensated for that, that's, you know, you shouldn't be, you know, that's your individual time. That's not work time at that point. So that's not really NDSU. No, NDSU isn't really.
Well, how about we do it this way? This is what I think they're getting at, what I was going to ask about too. Okay. So, as you know, I'm an ethicist, although a lot of people don't realize that, but I'm asked sometimes to provide testimony to state legislators or to provide background or information to the newspapers because of my professional position at NDSU. So apparently being here means that you're an expert in the area. They're looking for expert testimony.
Well, if the legislature is asking you to do it, that's fine. Like, you know, go, you know, then you're being asked as kind of a public employee to give public information. You know, one public agency is asking, you know, legislature is asking a public employee to participate. That's perfectly covered. That would be fine. If a third party is saying, hey, look, I want to hire your services to go in and testify, that's a little bit different. Because then you're not really testifying in your capacity as a public employee. You're testifying as an expert witness in that capacity. You know, I think that one would probably be more independent than it would be as an employee. I think the grayer area is like you know, I think it's fine for like student body president. I think it's fine for like faculty senate president to go testify on bills that are that they can, as long as they say they're not representing the university, but they speak for a constituent, an internal stakeholder of NDSU by saying, I speak for the you know, faculty, or I speak for the students. I think that's covered.
Well, what about if it's something along the lines of this. I see a bill that I think is unethical. And I go there, and part of it is, I've testified for these folks before, is they want to know your credentials. Where have you published? What have you done here? What have you done that? Because they won't listen to you otherwise.
Yeah, no,
So
you can,
if
you can
say,
absolutely,
I am here's my title at NDSU, and that you use that, and then say, but the views I express here do not necessarily represent the views of North Dakota State University, the Northern Plains Ethics Institute, or any sane person. Are you off the hook?
yes. Yeah, that's all you have to do. I mean, like you said, now, like I said, that's the exact same thing I was talking about. Now, if you go up there and don't reference that, if it's something unrelated to your activities at NDSU, you don't have to do that because you're not referencing NDSU. That's my stamp collector model. If you were a stamp collector guy and the bill had nothing to do with NDSU and your experience at NDSU had nothing to do with it, you wouldn't say you were associated with NDSU, nor would you express that your views don't represent NDSU. It's only once you start saying, here's my CV, and my CV is associated with NDSU, that you just have to clarify that you're not speaking on behalf of NDSU. That's all you have to do.
If Don and Andrea could put in, did that answer your question? If not, we can try again. I want to hit the newspaper one though, because sometimes we are being contacted by the newspaper to give an opinion on issue last year was asked about the election in Fargo, and whether or not there was a conflict of interest between one of the candidates and her position as a real estate agent or part of this real estate thing. And I gave it, and they put in that it was NDSU. I also said my views do not represent, and so that never got in, and it was all over the phone, by the way.
Yeah, the same rule applies, Dennis. I mean, I'm not going to say that you're not going to ruffle some feathers, but you're free to say that, to give your opinion. You're a citizen, and you can speak in that area. You just can't speak on behalf of the institution. And now I don't actually recall the news story where you were quoted, so I don't. My guess is they probably didn't quote your "I'm not speaking on behalf of the university" thing. And a lot, I think there's a kind of a public understanding at this point that a lot of faculty members don't speak for behalf of the institution, so they don't necessarily always have to take up space in a story with that. But you really should make sure that you say that when you're speaking on these topics.
We do have a related question in the chat that we may have touched on it. If an NDSU employee drives to Bismarck to testify as a citizen on a bill unrelated to NDSU, are they expected to take time off from work?
Yes. I mean, it's not, if it's unrelated to your NDSU activities, that's you acting in your individual capacity, and that's not us. That's not the work.
Well, how would you do that?
Well,
Because a lot of us are salary.
Faculty members, if you're, like I said, that is for people who have to account for their time. Faculty members' time is accounted for differently. Like for me, you don't have, faculty members don't have sick leave and don't have annual leave. And so for me though, as an administrator, I have to report in all that stuff. So if it were me that was going to take a day off to go testify, however, if I missed a whole day, I would have to take 8 hours of annual leave for that. And
you also want to say, of course, that we would notify our supervisor and make sure that our work is covered for the day.
I assume that was a given, Dennis, but thank you. That you
Are
would
there other? Go ahead.
take off without doing that. Yeah, that's never a good idea.
Are there other questions about this? I'm gonna say what I've been finding, and for a number of years, and even after we've been doing this for I don't know how many years, is people are afraid to get involved in the political process because they're worried about violating one of these. And in reality, it's relatively difficult to violate one of these. Is that true?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, that's, the problem is, if you do violate it, it is a bit of a problem. So you need to proceed cautiously. But there's more risk on elections and ballot initiatives than there are in the legislative piece, because legislative piece tends to be more policy oriented than criminal law oriented. But yes, I think it's worthy of being careful, but you should also know that you can do it. I mean, it's not terribly difficult to do. Just follow some simple rules. And, if you've got questions, give us a call. We'll walk you through it.
We have a question. What about attending meetings that discuss legislative topics, strategies during work time?
Well, once again, it depends on what I sit down every day and discuss for meetings with regard to legislative strategies, because that's part of my job. If it's unrelated to your job, then it should in fact be separate. And once again, that goes back to the accounting of your time, depending on the nature of your employment.
Well, could you give us a little bit of an example to help illustrate that?
You talking to me, or are you talking to the question?
No, I'm talking to you because when I do ethics, ethics is about everything. So basically I can make it all part of my job. Are you talking?
Well, part of this is the difficulty of knowing how different types of employees account for their time. So if I'm going to a meeting, if I'm a member of a political party, and honestly, I'm not. But if I were a member of a political party and I wanted to go have a meeting with that political party for a couple of hours to talk strategy, I would be obligated to it fell during the business hours, and that I would be obligated to take annual leave during that time. Faculty members, because they don't, their accounting, their work day is so unique that annual leave and sick leave isn't tracked like that. They really shouldn't be using university resources for that. If it's a purely personal stuff, unrelated to NDSU, they shouldn't be using university assets for that. Tracking their time is a little bit different, but they really shouldn't be using university assets for political purposes like that.
So if, say, North Dakota United wanted to contact me for some effort that they've got, some drive that they have with the legislature, do that on my own time?
I'd say, yeah, probably. I mean, but as a faculty member, it's kind of you're in a kind of a unique position. What is your own time?
Yeah.
That's a faculty employment hour keeping is a weird creature. And the distinction between your own time and work time is a little bit unusual, because you keep odd hours. Not you, Dennis, specifically, but just you faculty keep odd hours, because it's kind of all over the place. So it's kind of tough. That's why I don't think the hours is as big a deal, because if your classes are covered, your research is covered, your service is covered, your time gets is more ambiguous. It's more along the lines of the assets used, other than time.
Right. So there's a continuation with Kristen talking about, as a librarian, she's part of the North Dakota Library Association, which has a legislative committee, and she does account for her time, and there are several bills directly related to libraries. So that would be something
that would be okay, because that's part of the mission.
And Tyler said, I spotted something in UND's guidance indicating political activities or testimonies not barred or limited during off time. Are there any restrictions at NDSU during one's off time? Off time seems murky with salaried and faculty positions.
Well, that's what we've been getting at, is the ambiguity of, for staff, it's pretty easy. Because we have to track our time. If you're going out there, you should be not on university time. The problem for that comes in with the faculty setting because of the uniqueness of their tracking system.
Tim Flacco says that don't use your NDSU letterhead to submit written testimony unless you are representing NDSU. This came up with some Fargo City commissioners over the years who provided testimony on a position issue where their position was different from the city's.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thanks, Tim.
So thanks, Tim, for that one.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
Experience. I got one last slide. Experience is the best teacher, though. The last slide I got is just like specifically, and Tim would be actually helpful on this one too. Yeah, how to communicate with legislators, as you know, kind of what works and what is effective. So legislators, there's two things. Legislators will have events in their district, and you can go to those events and talk to them and express your concerns. They oftentimes go knocking door to door. What is this video? You know, express your concerns at that time. I do that myself. Email is another common way of communicating with your legislators. I will say this, during the session, particularly if you're in a district where you have a legislative leader, it gets harder for that email to get through they just get inundated with emails during the session. And so, you know, are they reading them? It gets harder and harder for them to keep up with their email, especially as the session nears completion at the end. There's this kind of franticness about getting all the work done. And so emails get harder and harder for them to keep up with. If you are sending an email, I would make sure to identify yourself as a constituent, that you are their constituent, because they also get inundated with just kind of generic emails from across the state or industry groups, things along those lines, reaching out to them. And I have a feeling that those don't get viewed with the same level of seriousness as a direct constituent outreach, which is what they're interested in. So very early on in the communication, you should be identifying yourself as a constituent. Here's something to keep in mind. Emails between you and your legislator are not public record. They're not subject to public records. So can the legislator turn around and do something with it? Yeah, I suppose they could, but they don't have to turn it over in the event of a public records request. So you can be a little comfortable that stuff that when you reach out to your legislator, that it's not going to be in the newspaper, although the legislator themselves could probably turn around and do something with it if they don't like it, or they like it. But so just FYI on that one. You know, I'm sure Tim has some stories on this one. Passion is good, but friendly and professional is also good. Being overly passionate about something, you know, can sometimes be a turnoff if you come across as being overly intense and not recognizing the complexity of the issue and that there might be others who feel differently. So, you know, be thorough and concise, but also mostly just be friendly and professional. You know, it's the thing about North Dakota. I come from, you know, larger states I've been in. It is really kind of, and this is going to sound corny, but like it's kind of great that in North Dakota you can know who your senator is and who both your representatives are. Like you see them at Hornbachers. Like in the larger states, you don't see that. You know, I rarely ever saw who. I mean, it was at a formal event if you saw a legislator. Here, you know, you can lean over the fence and talk to them sometimes, and that's you know, Vermont gets a lot of kudos for being very democratic with their town halls and et cetera, et cetera. I think North Dakota, actually has more public officials than Vermont does. And it's a very democratic, small d state with where your voice can have huge repercussions here, because we all have, there's so few of us with only 700 some thousand and so few legislators. Everybody's voice matters. It really does. It sounds like, I know it sounds corny, but it really is true here. So, you know, if you're interested in this, like Dennis said, be careful, but don't hold back on, you know, and thinking that you can't do it, because your voice can be heard. So that's all I've got. So I'm available for questions. It's a little after 1:00. We still
So
got time.
let's see. Tim mentioned that he had 1,700 emails on one bill in 24 hours. And he also recommends that you put the bill number on the message line so that they can understand what's going on. He also recommends that you personalize your comments with examples of how the bill will impact you and what you do. It gives them great examples they can use on the floor during debate. There's a question, how do we get the PowerPoint? The PowerPoint will be on the Northern Plains Ethics Institute website. It can also be sent to you if you you give us your email address. You can send it to ndsu.npei@ndsu, so on.
And also
and
the
make sure
web,
that you get that.
the website, it'll also be on the president's legislative website. And you can find that website always by just Google NDSU and legislature. That should be the first hit that you get, should be the president's website. So, and I'll try and get it up there as soon as I can.
So are there any other, when do you think the link to the recording of this session will be available? That's Tyler Waltz, hopefully by the end of this week. And so it will be edited and put on the NPEI YouTube and also linked to our Facebook page as well. Any other questions for Chris?
I see Sydney has a hand up. Go ahead, Sydney.
Did you have her, Sydney?
Oh, yep. Sorry. It just took me a second to unmute. Thank you for this presentation, Chris. I just have a question about student organizations. I'm a pharmacy faculty member, and there is a pharmacy bill going up in legislation that will affect our profession. And we've been asked by the national level of this organization to have our student organization phone bank and call into the legislatures on this. Is that something that they're allowed to organize within NDSU, or is there any limits on that?
That's an interesting one. Students are free to, you know, they enjoy more freedom than, like, you know, anybody really, because they're not employees of the institution to go participate in government. The rest of us have to live with employment restrictions. Students can, you know, do whatever they want. The question there would be on the use of student institution assets to do it. And if you don't mind, I would like to, could we talk about that one a little bit afterwards?
Yeah, definitely.
We'll give maybe a little more information about that.
Yep, that would be great. I would appreciate it.
Yeah, can you just reach out to me and we'll schedule something?
Yep, I will send you an email.
Thanks, Sydney.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Sorry, I thought I had a few more minutes, so it was eating a piece of candy. But I want to thank Chris for the wonderful work he did. Oh, I'm just looking at the chat too. So what I'll say is I want to thank everybody for coming. It's incredibly important for our voices to be heard in the state, not only for NDSU, but of course for our own needs. And so it's hugely helpful to know what we can do and what we can't do. This event was recorded. The recording will be made available as was stated. And I want to thank Chris once again, and finally, and then let you all go to have a very productive day. Make sure that you account for all of your time for NDSU. So, I'll see y'all later.